Appreciate the non-introduction. I've never thought columnarly, never. And I'm glad there was that break. I'm glad there was that break because swings are a really difficult act to follow. So I'm going to throw a curveball here, I think, and at an event called The Future of Stories, I'm going to talk literally about the future of stories. The future of stories is not something I'm going to tell you in my first minute up here. It's something I'm going to tell you in my 18th minute up here, my last minute. I'm not going to tell you that right now because that would be really stupid. Because then you'd be that much more likely to stop listening to me. I'm much more likely to start texting or tweeting or daydreaming or anything really other than listening to me, which is always a possibility anyway. And I'm not going to start with that because the movie Shawshank Redemption didn't start with Andy Dufresne sanding that boat on that Mexican beach. It ended with Andy Dufresne on that Mexican beach. American Beauty. Remember that movie? I'm disappointed it hasn't had sort of a longer shelf life and people don't still talk about it because I think it was this little piece of genius. And there was a voiceover very early in the movie, Kevin Spacey's character. My name is Lester Burnham. This is my neighborhood. This is my street. This is my life. I'm 42 years old. In less than a year, I'll be dead. If you show me a gun at the beginning of a story, that gun has to go off before the end of the story. Otherwise, the credits can't roll. Telling you a story is, in a way, making you wait. So I'm going to make you wait. I'm going to tell you 7 thoughts, my thoughts about stories, and then and only then will I tell you the future of stories. So 1, I work for the Tampa Bay Times. It used to be the St. Pete Times. We changed names in January. I knew there'd be some of that. We changed names though because St. Pete Times was no longer really an accurate reflection of the size and the scope of the publication. Some people are surprised when I tell them the Tampa Bay Times is the biggest newspaper in Florida. They think it's Miami. They think it's maybe even Orlando. It's not even close. Even more people are even more surprised when I tell them the Tampa Bay Times is the largest paper in the Southeast. They think surely it must be Atlanta, but it's not. In between Key West and the Washington Post, the biggest newspaper is your local newspaper. So who cares? Nobody reads newspapers anyway. Newspapers are dying, circulation is going down, and that's true all across America. But here's the thing about the Tampa Bay Times. Circulation is not going down. Circulation is going up. Why? Most newspapers write articles. The Times at least tries to write stories. What's the difference? Articles are a collection of information, structured hopefully in some sequence that makes some sense. Articles are fine. They're just not stories. Stories are stories. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have characters, and these characters move through time and through space. They encounter obstacles and challenges, and they overcome these obstacles and challenges, or they don't. But there's conflict and there's resolution. Stories. People sometimes say to me, I just want the facts. Just the facts, please, just the facts, ma'am. And these people are liars. They don't think they're liars. They don't mean to be liars, but that's what they are. Because nobody wants just the facts. It's not who we are. 2. Check my time. 2. You'll notice what's not going on behind me. I have all these beautiful digital screens and I'm not using them. There's a reason. Earlier this week, I was in Kawa Cafe over in St. Pete, and Nate showed up, and he says to me, "So where are your slides? Where are your pictures? Where's your presentation?" I said, "What?" There's a real reason. There's a better reason. Today, there's nothing but information. Information is not what's scarce. What's scarce is attention. And I want you to pay attention to me. And I think it's a really important skill. Everything's moving so quickly right now. Things flying at your face, tweets, links, everything coming at you. I think it's important, critically important at this point, to be able to move really quickly, swim in that stream, and then just as quickly, change gears, stop, and sit still and stay still, and pay attention to just one thing for just a little bit. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 18 minutes. So I've probably said, I don't know, not quite 1,000 words to this point, and I'll probably say another 1,000 or a little bit more. And I'm going to ask you, and I know this is a lot to ask, but I'm going to ask you to just pay attention to me. 3, stories aren't the only reason the Tampa Bay Times is gaining circulation. It's also because of where we are, where we sit. Florida is the best story state. You know this, right? This is true. On a list of 50, we're number 1. I don't know that this list actually exists anywhere other than my head, but Florida's number 1. It is America's story incubator. What happens is that all the people up there come down here. And then it gets hot. And then it stays hot. And it's a really big state. It's bigger than people think, but we're surrounded by water, so there's nowhere to go. So we bounce into borders. People bounce into the borders, and then, ultimately, they bounce into each other. No conflict, no story. And we have conflict. So the future here in Florida happens here in Florida first, if that makes any sense. Florida is where the future happens first. Think about this. There is this large portion of older people here. They're mostly white. There's this large and growing portion of the population that is younger, not so white. This is going to happen. This is going to be one of the conflicts, not all the conflicts, but one of the conflicts. And gates don't work. Walls don't last. They never last. So the sun comes up in Florida, over there. I'm not sure where we are, the East Coast. Comes up over there, hard, bright, hot. It sucks the color off the stucco sides of the stacked up condos on the strips of sand over there. It passes Cape Canaveral, where the space shuttle used to shake the ground. It passes all the many fantasy lands in Orlando. It passes Polk County, parts of Polk County where the afternoon air still smells sick, sweet of citrus. And it comes over here to the land of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, off of which people jump. It's 197 feet down. They're going 75 miles per hour when they hit that water. They think perhaps it's a beautiful way to die and a beautiful place to die. And they're half right. The sun does get softer over here on our side of the state, and the colors do get brighter and better. And we're reminded here on a daily basis that there is such beauty in the setting sun. 4, let's talk about Twitter. Is that a good transition? Let's talk about Twitter. People say you can't say anything of substance in 140 characters. Those people are wrong. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. That's a 6-word story. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. Does anybody know who wrote that? Ernest Hemingway. It's a damn good tweet, too. It's a pretty muscular tweet. Space for a retweet. A manual retweet, you can do the RT and then tell Ernest Hemingway what an idiot he is. So I got a friend named Ben. Ben also works at the Times, but I've known Ben for longer than that. We worked at the same newspaper in New York State before we both came down here, because we both tell stories. And Ben had a complicated relationship with his father. His father once told him, "I wish I had been there." And Ben told his father, "Why weren't you?" So last year, his father died. And he flew out to Oklahoma to the funeral, which he decided to tweet. He announced his intentions on Twitter before he got on the plane on Tampa, and when he landed in Oklahoma, he turns on his phone, and the phone is filled with tweets saying, "Sorry," offering condolences, and he tweeted, "Thanks, friends, but my father was an irresponsible drunk who abandoned us." My point is, tweets can be stories. Tweets can be stories, but the window, that window that pops up on TweetDeck or Twitter.com or on the screen of your iPhone, it's just a pen and a pad. 5, let's talk about blogs. I like blogs. I read blogs. I have a blog. Last month, for the Republican National Convention, I was the guy the paper picked to blog the RNC. It was an interesting experience. As I got busier and busier as the week went on, I started to have this feeling that I wasn't seeing enough. Every time I left the computer screen in our little convention center compound, I felt like when I came back, I had lost the scent of all the various feeds, what's going on. I couldn't monitor all the things I needed to monitor for this blog if I left my computer screen. So usually, what I ended up doing was just going for little walks, and I ended up in this tunnel, the RNC tunnel. Did anybody go to the RNC or see this tunnel or hear about this tunnel? Really bizarre. They built a tunnel, a temporary tunnel, from Franklin Street, near the entrance of the convention center, all the way to almost the entrance of the Tampa Bay Times Forum. A tunnel. It was white, built out of fabric, but mostly plastic, and it felt like you were walking through a tubular rented wedding tent. And I think the idea was to create this air-conditioned haven in the excessive late August heat in Tampa. And it didn't really work. The heat started to win, and very early in the week, this tunnel started to smell and feel sort of like a YMCA locker room. And somebody involved with the event, and Lord knows there were many, apparently recognized this too, because they tried to really gussy it up, and suddenly, as the week went on, there were ficus trees on the side of this tunnel. Real ficus trees, many ficus trees, and then there were buckets of roses hanging from the ceiling. Real roses, no small expense. And then there were flat screen TVs, like this size, like every 20 feet in the entire tunnel on both sides. So I walked up and down this tunnel and I listened to the chatter of the people in the tunnel, and basically what I heard was, where does this thing go? Where is this thing taking us? I don't know. So here's the thing about blogs and my concern about blogs. The more you blog, the less you see. They start to feel like tunnels. 6. That was really a reach. 6. So articles and stories. Articles aren't stories, but articles are parts of stories, or can be. Often they're beginnings or they're endings. And I want to tell you about an ending. In November of 2010, I read a short article, a brief, tiny little brief, about a woman over in Cape Canaveral. She had died. She had died in her car, in her garage, in her townhouse, and had not been found for 16 months. She hadn't been found until her home was sold in a foreclosure auction. And the man who bought the home took the keys, opened the door, walked into the house, walked around downstairs, walked around upstairs, walked back downstairs, into the garage, over to the car, and stopped and stared at the mummified remains of a human being whose name was Catherine Norris. So my job to turn that article into a story is to report from that end back to the beginning, to her birth, if I can get there. That's my job for the Tampa Bay Times, to turn articles into stories. So, I start with public records, as I almost always do. Catherine Norris had left behind for a recluse an almost shocking amount of public paper trail. She'd sued people, people had sued her. She'd been married twice, divorced twice. She had interacted with people. I sometimes think of public records as the bottom rungs of rope ladders. There's something to grab onto, and then I can start climbing my way up. There was plenty of rope ladder rungs, plenty to justify a trip over to Cape Canaveral. So I gave myself 3 days. I go over there, and I get lucky. I pull up to the house, and I see a dumpster in the yard. And in the house, the man who bought the house was there cleaning it out. Catherine Norris was a hoarder. She had left lots of stuff in the house. So he's trying to clean this out. And I introduce myself and I tell him what I'm trying to do. And he says, sure, come on in, and we talk. And then I said, you get back to it and I'll just poke around in here. Is it okay if I take some stuff? He said, sure. Her long-lost relatives had come by and already picked up what they wanted. It was just trash to him. It was potential information to me. Grabbed a laundry basket. I started throwing all sorts of things in there, envelopes, address books, return addresses, phone bills, little notes pinned to bulletin boards, everything I could get my hands on. And he notices what I'm looking for, and he says, you know what? A lot of that stuff is out in the dumpster already. I said, really? And I was dressed pretty much the way I'm dressed right now. This is sort of my uniform, probably not the vest, shirt and tie. So I jump into the dumpster. I start doing the same thing in the dumpster. I get back to the hotel room that night and start going through what I have in this laundry basket from that dumpster and from our home. And in the hotel room, I lay out all these things as best I can in chronological order, from the desk to the area around the TV to the bedspread. And I can stand back, and for the first time, I can see Catherine Norris. There she is. That's her story, starting to be there. 7. F. Scott Fitzgerald said there were only 2 stories: the charm of women and the courage of men. And he probably oversimplified, but probably not by much. Christopher Booker, a British writer, says there are 7: overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, rebirth. That's it. Those are the 7 stories, and you can quibble. Maybe they're 9, maybe they're 15, maybe they're 27, I don't know. But the point is, there are only so many stories. There have only ever been so many stories. These are how we've communicated with each other. These stories are how we've oriented ourselves in the messy, pointless chaos of existence. These are the stories that we told ourselves and each other before we could write them down. These are the stories that our ancestors drew on walls of caves So it's an election year, and that's blinking, so I'm going to finish. It's an election year. What are political campaigns but story contests? What are they? That's what they are. People say, why don't they talk about the issues? They don't talk about the issues because they'd lose if they talked about the issues. We don't think in issues. We think in stories. And we always have. And so now, this is going to change right now in our lifetimes, in 2012, right now, because of Twitter, because of Facebook, YouTube, the internet, because things float around in digital pixels and aren't just typeset in ink. No. The future of stories is stories. And that's it.